Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to... Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'd like to talk to parts 16 through to 20, which are regarding returning prisoners. And part 16 talks about who is a returning prisoner. Part 17, the criteria for determination that the person is a returning prisoner. Part 18 talks about the time for the Commissioner to determine that that prisoner is a returning prisoner. And Part 19, that the Commissioner must serve a written notice to the person who is determined to be a returning prisoner. Part 20, though, describes what that determination notice must look like, and it states here that the determination notice must state that the person named in the notice has been determined by the Commissioner to be a returning prisoner for the purposes of this Act, and state that the person is subject to release conditions under this Act, state the period for which the person is subject to release conditions, set out the standard release conditions, state that the person must report to a probation officer at a probation service centre within 72 hours of service of the notice, provide information about how to contact probation officer, and so on and so forth. But what this does is actually neglect the actual human side of this, the situation. Now, if we take, for example, the plane load of prisoners that we believe are arriving in the next day or so, if they are prisoners that have come off Christmas Island, let me tell you now that they will be traumatised, they'll be upset, they'll be in shock as to what's happened to them over the last few days. They'll come here, they won't have legal representation when they get here, they will have difficulty making sense of anything that the authorities throw at them, such as this determination notice that they are a returning prisoner. We've got to remember that these are people that are coming under extraordinary circumstances, and that what are standard release conditions to New Zealand prisoners who have had time in prison, who have had access to their lawyers, who have had access to legal advice. Those conditions don't apply to the people that will be arriving on planes. Their lawyers are over in Australia. But chances are they haven't seen their lawyers for probably 8, 9, 10 months of their detention, because that's part of the system in Australia, that they're being denied regular access to their lawyers. So they're getting here without any legal representation, without any support people around them, without any support base whatsoever, without their family or friends to be at the airport to greet them, and yet they are expected to make head or tail of this determination notice that all things going well would be served on them immediately upon landing here in New Zealand, or if not within a practical time, but certainly not greater than 6 months out. Maybe after 4 or 5 months of being here, they might actually have been able to settle down and just get their heads around what has actually happened to their lives, because their lives have been flipped into turmoil, from basically being put in detention to going through the whole situation in the detention centres, in particular Christmas Island, to then being taken off the island, to being brought back here to a prison in the mainland Australia, then to being brought here. They will be in shock. They have been traumatised. They won't know what's going on, and yet they're going to be whacked with this official notice without any legal support, without any assistance, or very little assistance from the authorities. They don't even know where they're going to be living. They don't know beyond 5 days what is in store for them. They won't have an address to go to. They won't know if their motel that they're plonked in is in Auckland somewhere. In 5 days' time, they might be in Hamilton, they might be in Rotorua, they might be anywhere in New Zealand, in Whangarei. And then the whole situation changes, because then they've got to find a new probation officer, they've got to find other people to report to, depending on the location where they're going to end up. So I have real concerns about the human side of this, that it's fine for the work to be done here, basically in a vacuum, without regard for what those guys have gone through, or men and women have gone through. That's why I believe that, there are parts. This shouldn't have been done through urgency. We've had enough time through the course of the year to write this legislation and to do a good job of it. Instead, we've heard that it's been drafted in 12 days and...
Dina Rourke.